Kourosh. From Google. I want to actually start by thanking both Dan and Marcus for setting this up. It's really a joy to be talking to the academic community. I think not only are we going to benefit from the research that people do in this area in terms of improving our techniques for fighting click fraud, but even more important to me is actually having more experts that understand the issues and making the discussion about click fraud much deeper and much more factual based than Dan pointed out some of the issues that exist there right now. On a personal note, it's actually good to be spending a day back on campus. I actually spent my undergraduate and graduate years at Stanford, and 6 of those years were actually in the older wing of this same building, working with my advisor John Hennessy on computer architecture research. So it's good to be here. I've been at Google for almost 5 years. For 4 of those years, I've been leading our effort, our engineering effort in this whole area. And we're actually very fortunate. We have a very talented team on the engineering side and also on the operations side. And today I'll touch upon some of the things that we do, but mainly I'm going to discuss some of the economic aspects of click fraud with you. Actually, maybe one thing that I want to spend, maybe I'll just take a minute and maybe useful for everybody, just to do a poll of quickly of where people come from. So how many people are actually in academia and research in this group? Okay. How many people are actually on the search engine side of things? Okay. How many people are in the startups or companies that Dan was pointing to doing actually click fraud analysis? Okay. Do we have advertisers in the group? Okay, cool. And any journalists in the group? That's interesting. Any other major group that I missed? All right.
I mean, security.
Okay. Great. All right. Thanks for going through that poll. Okay. My talk has really 4 sections, and basically I could go on for hours on each one of those sections, and actually the talk is very, very long. What I'll do is I'll spend most of my time on the first section, which is actually economics of click fraud, and I will try to very quickly at the end give you just a preview of the topics in the other areas. We will make the slides available, like I said, early next week, and so you can take the time if you're interested to actually look at the material in much more detail. So on the economic side, basically, there are 2 goals that I have. I want you to give you a sense of how the economics of online advertising works for the advertiser, and also how it actually impacts Google and our incentives in what we do in this whole area. The second part is actually brief. It's basically our approach to this whole problem. The third part is actually very important. We really lack evaluation metrics in this whole area in terms of understanding how well something works or it doesn't. There is no ground truth, and that's a huge issue, and I think there's major opportunity for research in that area, and I hope really people take that seriously. And the metrics, the major metric that people are using today in the industry is really flawed, and there are lots of limitations to it, and there's a lot of detail in the talk about that whole issue. And finally, something as mundane as counting clicks and comparing what, say, Google says compared to what the advertiser sees on the logs actually turns out to have a lot of subtle issues and leads to major issues in terms of the way people do analysis. Furthermore, it's important for people to be able to verify that whatever Google says is actually, I see it on my side. So I'll briefly touch upon that as well. But again, the slides will have a lot more detail than I have really time to get into. So in the first part, like I said, this is the major part that I want to focus on is really economics of online advertising. And you're going to find out, hopefully, that ROI, as many of you know, is king. And the French speakers among you already know that this is true. So hopefully the rest of you will also, agree that it's the case. So I just wanted to start by giving you an actual case study. I've simplified the numbers, but this is from an advertiser. We talk to advertisers all the time. We had a forum for advertisers on click fraud, one of several forums that we've had several months ago at Google. And this advertiser basically, this is the situation that they saw. Their spend, their costs essentially on Google went up from $1,000 to $2,000 in the Christmas timeframe. So that's fine. But what was happening is the conversions or the number of sales that they were making really dipped. And then if you look at the measure of ROI, which is basically think about the dollars that they spend compared to sales that they do, or dollars per conversion, that really suffered from $50 to $200. It turns out that after Christmas, things stabilized. But this advertiser obviously didn't like this. Every time they wanted to sell something, it cost them $50, and now it was costing them $200, and they really were confused what's going on. They're absolutely convinced that this is caused by click fraud during this period. And so basically one of the goals that I have in this major portion of the talk is to give you a framework to think about how ROI behaves in this area, and how advertisers actually have to react to it, and the understanding that advertiser has to have about this. And furthermore, the framework will also allow you to understand incentives for a company like Google or other companies that are in this advertising business. And even though the framework may appear simple, like any other good framework, the nice thing about it is that it actually allows you to think about a lot of rich dynamics of this whole system. And the hope is that it also allows you to make interesting observations, and sometimes surprising observations that you may have not noticed about the dynamics and the nature of this whole business. So let's start with very simple stuff. You basically, on the x-axis, imagine you have the volume of sales, the number of units an advertiser sells. And on the y-axis, you have the amount of money they spend to make those sales. So that's a pretty easy concept. And if you think about online, basically the advertiser, the amount that they spend is actually obviously related to the number of clicks that they're receiving and how much they're paying per click, so which is called cost per click, CPC. And the notion of ROI, one very useful notion of ROI, is what's called cost per acquisition, or think of the cost per sale. So we'll refer to that CPA, and that's basically the ratio of the amount of dollars you spend divided by the number of sales that you make. Again, that's a number, not the revenue that you're making on those sales. So basically, if you look at this chart, where the advertiser really wants to be is in this area, low cost per acquisition, right? They want to make lots of sales with very little advertising dollars. And as you move towards the upper left corner, things actually get much worse for the advertiser in terms of the amount that they have to spend. So let's take a starting point for the advertiser. Let's say you plot where they are. Say they're spending $100 and they're getting 10 sales. So that's the place they're on the plot. It turns out that if you want to know what the average cost per acquisition is for that advertiser, that's simply the slope of the line through the origin. So basically, if you're at this point, that's the average cost per acquisition you have. If this slope moves down, you're doing better in terms of cost per acquisition. If this slope moves up, you're doing worse. One of the important things to notice is that there are a lot of points on this slope. So on the same slope. So just plain average ROI doesn't tell you the whole story. The volume of sales is also very important. You may be able to achieve, very few sales with very good ROI. But the question is how much sales can you achieve with that ROI? So that's an important issue to also take into account. Basically, there's movement in this space, right? Let's say the advertiser, changes a few things and suddenly they move to point 2. Well, at that point, the average CPA has actually gone down. That's good. They make a few more points, changes, and what's happening is basically you see their sales are going up. They spend a little bit more. Well, they spend a bit more and they get more sales, but they're still on average CPA. They're happy. They're actually better off than where they were on the first point. And eventually, reach a point where things go haywire on them. Their spend actually goes slightly higher. Their sales actually go down compared to level 2 and 3. That's not a good place to be. As you can see, the average CPA has also gone up. So there these seemingly erratic behavior in cost per acquisition that happens to all advertisers. And it leads to lots and lots of confusion in terms of what's going on. If you don't have a framework of understanding actually what's causing all this. So in order to follow up with the framework more, it's interesting to look at how the space behaves and think about the notion of ROI curves. So if this is an assumption that you can get a linear increase in your sales by just increasing your spend linearly. So basically, and it's actually a very shallow slope. This may have been true, for example, if you advertised with Google 5-6 years ago. Very little competition on a lot of keywords. You pay the minimum bid. And really, I mean, the traffic that you're getting as users come more online and use Google, you just get more traffic, and there's no reason for you to change your bid. You can imagine that that can give you a linear kind of curve in here. But one of the things that happens is that competition and other things basically lead to curves becoming kind of more, giving you more diminishing returns as you increase your spend. And as competition and other things increase, these curves become more curved and more nonlinear. And one way to think about this in the context of online advertisement is think of you selling iPods. Imagine there are 1,000 users that come and search for iPod on Google, and you want to get a fraction of those. Other advertisers want that too. So basically, you're going to put a bid on Google, and it's going to land you someplace in terms of the ranking of ads in the slots that we have in various positions. So if you end up at the low position, you're basically going to get some percentage of those users. So you'll say you're spending again $100 and you get 10, enough users to get 10 sales. If you want to actually increase the traffic just on that keyword, given that there's competition, you end up having to pay a higher bid. So imagine you double your bid to say double the traffic that you get, and hopefully double the sales that you get. Well, if you notice, you do get the extra traffic, but that traffic now is costing you more. So therefore, that tells you that your total spend, traffic times your bid, is going to have a quadratic effect, essentially, rather than a linear effect. So that's one of the reasons you see diminishing returns. There are a lot of other reasons that diminishing returns happen in this business, and in any advertising business. I mean, it has to do with the fact that as you try to extend your sales, the quality of leads that you have may go down. I mean, if you think about direct mail, you may start by saying, oh, I want to target these households and only send them my catalog because I know they have a higher chance of converting. Well, now if you want to increase your volume, you extend the households that you want to reach, and it just basically gets you less and less in terms of the amount of money that you're spending and how many sales that you get. So tons of reasons why these curves have this behavior themselves. And if you look at the previous the points that we said, and advertisers kind of getting confused about what's going on, you can imagine that they very well may be landing on these curves, and these curves may be shifting on them. And we will talk about all those dynamics in this talk, and so that you have a better understanding of fundamentally what causes all of this. And it turns out that if this framework helps you understand the ROI curves and the causes for this shifts, it really leads to just much less confusion about what's going on. One of the things that the framework actually allows you to do is to understand how much an advertiser should spend given an ROI curve. So here's your ROI curve. It has the diminishing returns that we said it has. The question is, where should I land? How should I? On Google, for example, one of the ways you determine where you land is the bid that you get. Like I said, how far up do you go on the rankings, and how much traffic did you get for the sales that you're going to get? And that's basically one of the concepts of understanding marginal CPA. So say you have a good that you sell for $20. Right? And say that given all your other costs, it turns out that $10 of that is pure profit to you. So if you think about marginal cost per acquisition, that's, if you want to sell that extra unit, how much you're willing to pay to sell that extra unit beyond what you were selling before. Well, that should be $10, right? Because you can sell stuff for lower. You can sell stuff with advertising costs of $1, and you make $9 profit on that. And as you try to expand it on this diminishing returns, you're going to get less and less profit per product that you sell. Eventually, you're going to reach a point where basically for that last sale that you're making, you're paying $10. And at that point, if you try to get more sales, you will increase your revenue, but your profit is actually going to dip. Right, because every unit that you're selling, you're putting a dollar bill on top of it and selling it to somebody. So that's a very simple concept. And basically, if you think about this curve, while the slope from the origin was the average CPA that you're achieving for a given point, the slope, the tangent to this curve is actually the marginal CPA that you achieve. And if you think about it, you're kind of selling, paying a marginal $1, say, for selling, and then you increase it to get more sales. You're marginally paying $2 for that next sale. You're marginally paying more, up to $10, and then you go to $11, and that's deadly for you. You don't want to be there. It really decreases your absolute profit, so you come back to that marginal point. Notice that the marginal point is at $10. but actually the average is lower, right? The slope of this line is actually lower than the slope of the marginal. So on average, you are actually making profit, you are actually maximizing your profit at that point. And that determines your spend that you want to do on that advertising platform. And if you think about the curve shifting, now we'll talk about lots of reasons why these curves shift, but very simple concept. Think about seasonality and Christmas coming back. So when Christmas happens, that visitor that comes to your site is much more likely to make a sale, to basically buy from you. So you're much more likely to make a sale. So you're paying the same, say, CPC to get that visitor or those clicks, but when they come to your site, they just, they want to buy something, they want to buy gifts, and they're going to buy more. So that's one of the things that, for example, causes a shift in this curve, where if you spend the same amount of money, you actually are getting more sales. And now the interesting question is that shift has happened, say, through seasonality, and where is your optimal point as an advertiser in terms of spend? I mean, you can spend the same amount and you'll make extra sales, but where is actually the optimal point? And the interesting thing is the same concept. You go up this curve with tangents until you reach your marginal threshold. And it turns out that, of course, the slopes on this curve, because it's been shifted, are shallower, so therefore the marginal threshold that you reach is going to happen at a higher point. And so your spend is going to be higher because of the shift in this curve. So that's also hopefully a simple concept. So basically, better ROI curve shifting to lower CPAs leads to advertisers increasing their spend and actually making more sense. This concept you can use at any level. I mean, we were talking about a single keyword, say, and the seasonality changing the behavior. You can compare two keywords, say iPod and personal music player. And you can see what those curves behave. Maybe the iPod curve works better for you than the personal music behavior, and you can use this same concept to try to decide how much spending you should do on those two keywords. You can really use it to decide at the search engine level. One search engine gives you one ROI curve, the other gives you another, and therefore, you're going to increase your spend on the search engine that gives you the better ROI curve. Again, that's perfectly natural if you think about it in this framework. And you can think of it as different places where you can spend your money on advertising. Think internet, online internet, think about direct mail. Same concept applies here. So basically, if you think about all of this, if you Google, the advertiser clearly wants this curve to shift to better ROI curves, right? They make more sales. And if you Google, we clearly want the advertiser to also have better ROI curves on our platform. And the reason for that is very clear. They'll spend more money with us. So if you think about the problem this way, we are both aligned. Both Google and the advertiser want this ROI curve to be better because it just means that they're going to spend more money with us. It's very clear. Now, another thing that the framework actually does is it gives you a really good way to think about the dynamics of this whole system. And one of the things about the dynamics is basically a good example for that is assume that Google just wakes up tomorrow and says, advertisers, I'm going to give you, all advertisers for them, I'm going to give you just a 50% discount. Okay, so either just ignore 50% of your clicks, or say whatever CPC I was going to charge you, I'll just charge half of that. Okay, so what that does clearly will shift your curve, right? Because with the same spend now, you can get more sales, et cetera, or you can lower your spend to get the same sales. Now the question is, what happens in this case? Any guesses in terms of what will happen to Google's revenue? Go ahead.
It's going to stay the same because the participating advertisers are going to double their bids.
Right. And that's exactly right. And what happens is basically take an advertiser that's spending $1 for their bid and their spend is $100, right? They're getting 100 clicks in. If they really want to stay at the same sales, they're really going to be spending only 50 cents to be on this curve. We gave them a discount and their spend is going to be $50. Half the spend, they get the same sales. But now they're on a new curve. Remember, this is not the optimal point for them anymore. So what are they going to do? They're going to try to increase, because they're going to say, well, wow, this is a better ROI curve, I should be spending more money on it. They're going to increase, they're going to go to a CPC of $2, and their spend is going to go to $200 to get more sales. But this is not an equilibrium situation, because every advertiser that is trying to compete for this keyword is going to do the same. And basically what's going to happen is that that's going to cause a shift in the negative direction of the curve, right? Basically, when advertisers start competing more in the auction, what happens is your ROI curve actually takes a shift to the wrong turn. And so you're going to fall right back on the previous curve that you were, and all that happens is that the equilibrium spend stays the same. The equilibrium sales for the advertiser stays the same. What dollar amount that Google makes stays the same. The only difference is that now the CPC went from $1 to $2. And you're giving them a 50% discount, so it doesn't really matter. So this also kind of is interesting. When something symmetrically affects all advertisers, there's a lot of dynamic nature to what goes on. One of the things to actually, back to the slide, is that all advertising venues are market-driven. I mean, there's supply and there's demand. But there's very few that work like this, like online advertising, where the supply and demand kind of reach equilibrium in a very fast and quick way, because basically Google is not really determining the cost of the click. It's people, market forces, and them competing that determines with the auction how much they're going to pay for that.
So where does this argument break down? Obviously, if Google went down to free, then something would break.
Yeah, it breaks down in several places. It breaks down, basically, imagine, if you go back to the curve that, say, was flat, and the person didn't have any competition, if you give them half discount, there's no need for them to increase their bid. There is no competition, right? Whatever traffic we get, we're going to send it to them. Right, so in places where there's absolutely no competition, we still do have keywords that don't have the competition. That actually, if you're a very savvy advertiser, you find them, you get one of those ROI curves that is rather flat and doesn't have this heavy diminishing returns. But when the keyword is competitive, those forces are going to recur. So yeah, that's one of the places this can break down. By the way, I just didn't kind of check when we started. How are we going to time?
10:30.
10:30.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So
we can ask you lots of questions if you want.
That's perfectly fine too. I'll be more than happy if people interrupt.
Actually, so in that case,
sure.
So why is the cost per click constant throughout the month? Why doesn't Google charge like the 20th click would cost a different amount than the first click?
Yeah,
that changes its curve.
Yeah, basically, I mean, one way to think about the curve on a given keyword, the way our auction works is, like I said, your spend is not that really, most advertisers are not defining their spend by their budget. A lot of advertisers, actually, their budget is really much more unlimited in the sense that it's really a safety net for them. Make sure, I don't spend more than that amount. But the way they're actually setting their spend on this is defining their CPC, which defines their rank on a given keyword. The question of why the auction doesn't work in a way that it just increases, basically starts with low CPCs for you and increases CPCs, that's one of potential auction dynamics that you can have. The way our auction works actually is that pretty much at any given point in time, advertisers that have budget left and want to show up are going to compete. So when you do a query, that's basically that auction happens right there. And then the question is, how much competition is there and what CPC? So the CPCs do vary actually. If an advertiser has a limited budget of $10 and they spend it all at 8 a.m., for the rest of the day, you won't have them competing in the auction. So there is that dynamic going on all the time. And one of the important things actually is that, and this is one of the issues with the metrics, is that a click is not equal to a click in terms of cost. That's a very bad assumption to make. And when somebody says, there's this many clicks that are good and this many clicks that are bad, what they're missing is what is actually the cost. That's one of the reasons. There are many reasons why clicks have different costs. But it's actually much more valuable for the advertiser to say, what was the cost that was bad if you were going to make an estimate, not how many clicks were bad.
One more thing.
Sure.
Here, kind of implicitly, you seem to assume that there's an unlimited supply of people who are willing to click and purchase.
Well, actually, I'm not.
No.
Basically, these curves can end at some point, right? So, if you are a network that has very few users,
right,
and imagine it can end right here, and you cannot go above that, right? So basically, yes, the margin may be good because there's not much competition, and therefore you don't have many advertisers going for the same keyword, and the advertiser will love it. The ROI that they can achieve is very good potentially because there's no competition. But they're not going to get much sales. They're going to spend as much, and they may not reach the margin, right? They may actually be on a margin that's lower. So you can get these curves to end earlier. That's one reason. Another issue is that advertisers don't necessarily have to go to their margin. If I have a limited number of things that I want to sell, then what I want to do is actually go up on these curves keeping the margin the same at any point in time and stop when I'm done in terms of the number of things that I want to sell. So the same concept applies, it's just that you're not going to reach your marginal threshold. You're just going to, but what's important is that as you decide how much you're going to spend on each curve, you want to incrementally have the same CPA. And you're going to go up on the curves until you reach the amount of sales that you want. So that's another concept. You don't necessarily have to reach the green point if you don't have unlimited sales. But if you have a situation where another iPod that I sell, I'm going to make more profit, then you're going to be more like the green spot. Okay. I want to quickly talk about limitations of ROI. Online ads, as most of you know, are one of the most measurable forms of advertisements out there. I mean, you can literally, in many cases, you can spend the CPCs and see what happens, and the lag is actually very low. The spending can be tuned in a very fine granularity, and it can be adjusted frequently. I mean, think about the difference between paying for a Super Bowl ad, millions of dollars in one shot, versus thinking about paying 10 cents per click and adjusting it to see what happens and targeting it to people you want them to see. A huge difference in terms of measurability, in terms of ability to affect and tune your ROI. At the same time, there is still advertiser confusion in terms of what actually is the right ROI metric is. There's many advertisers I've talked to, and I ask them, how do you measure ROI? And the answer you get sometimes is click-through rate. Content has less click-through rate than search, therefore its ROI is worse for us. Well, that's a very bad metric, it turns out. If you think about conversion rate, a lot of people just think about conversion rate and say, I convert better on X than Y. Well, what's wrong with that if you just look at conversion rate? What is that?
Living at cost.
Exactly. I mean, ROI has a cost component. There's a conversion component and a cost component. And just saying the conversion rate is better on X than Y is really a bad way to compare, because the one that has a lower conversion rate may be charging you nothing for those conversions, right? I mean, that's the point. And there are lots of other caveats. Not all advertisers have online sales. I mean, the concept of conversion may be actually difficult. Think about a legal firm that puts an ad on Google. People call and talk to them and fill a form, and then later on, eventually, they'll get a lawsuit and class action lawsuit that make tons of money for them. Now, try to define what conversion means there. It's clearly much harder in some cases than others, where you really do have the online sales. Sometimes you can underestimate the value of the conversion. So, in terms of determining what your marginal threshold should be, you may forget about the lifetime value of the acquired customer. Imagine you're in the wine business, and the first bottle that you sell to the customer, the first case that you sell to the customer, that's not what's really important. What's really important is that how often that customer is going to come back to you, and buy more. And it turns out there are verticals in our advertising business where if you look at the cost per acquisition for the first sale, the amount they're paying for that acquisition just wouldn't make any sense to you. You would think they're crazy to be doing that. But then when you think about that business, you see all of the advertisers are doing this. It's not a one advertiser outlier that has no clue about how to run their business. It actually turns out that they're thinking about the lifetime of the customer. And another concept is, we were going to talk briefly about the reasons that these curves shift, but another concept is that when these curves shift on advertisers, all this confusion and all this change in ROI causes volatility to them in the ROI that they're getting, and leads to risk-averse behavior. Think about stocks. If a stock is more volatile, you basically are going to be, you're going to have a premium, basically, because of that. You're willing to pay less for that than if the stock is much more solid in terms of its performance. And that's another issue. Basically, it means that advertisers, because of the volatility, and any volatility you have in the system, for any reason where there's major shifts in the curves, they may actually think about their threshold of CPA or CPC that they want to pay at a lower amount than what would be optimal, actually. Now that we've talked about the limitations, let's look at reasons for these curves shifting. And that's another thing that this framework can really help you with. Go ahead. Absolutely. I mean, that's a major point of what I'm trying to do. Thanks for the question. We will come to it in 1 or 2 slides. Basically, one of the main things is seasonality. I talked about that. Christmas comes about, the average visitor that comes to your site just has a much more likelihood of converting and buying from you. So basically, you get a shift in the curve. But this seasonality is not just a Christmas issue. It may be a time of day issue. Maybe your product sells better in the morning than in the afternoon. It could be a time with the day of week issue. Maybe you're better off on weekends than weekdays. So basically, you can imagine that your your morning curve may be this, and your evening curve may be this. And so if you're really a smart advertiser and know what you're doing, you want to adjust by the hour of the day in terms of how much you want to, what the CPC should be. Right? So there's a lot of aspects to this whole thing. Similarly, as more people come online and are paying online, demographics are changing on you. The geography where the traffic is coming from is changing. If you're applying your advertisement across a large geography. Age of people, income, various other things. All these things cause shifts on you that basically it will affect your ROI. So what are ways advertisers can improve ROI? I mean, there's really two components. You can do smarter spend, right? I mean, pick keywords that you pick, how much you're willing to pay per each one, et cetera, et cetera. And you really need to adapt dynamically. Like, again, there's just lots of reasons these curves shift on you all the time. And one way, and the other thing is actually when you get that visitor, increase the chances that they're going to buy from you. It's a very simple concept. So basically, when they come to your site, optimize your site so there's better flow, they can find the product quickly, and if they want to buy something, they can do it with little or no pain. So basically, simple flow, simple checkout. And another thing which should be obvious is competitive sale prices. Right? I mean, if you're in a competitive area, what does the user do? They go and click on one ad, check the price. They go and click on the other ad, check the price. If all else is equal, guess how they're going to make their choice? So you are paying for the visitor to come there. If they're going to go buy from somebody else because your prices are not good and competitive, guess what? Your ROI is going to be really poor. And one of the things about these two areas, just as an example, is you may just think about bids and push yourself way up on this curve with the diminishing returns and say, I want the top slot on Google. You're paying a lot for that slot. Every click is going to cost you a lot. But if you're competitive, your sale prices are not competitive, people are not going to buy from you. They're going to visit you, they're going to visit the next person, buy from them. So it's really a bad proposition. So maybe if you're better off actually to reduce your sale price so that they have a higher chance of buying from you and actually pay less for your advertisement. So you're the second slot. So when they compare you to your competitor, they actually buy from you. And that's some of the optimizations that people have to really be aware of when they do this. Go ahead.
When we are refining the model here, so far your curves go through or start at the origin.
They actually,
for a large class of advertisers, there is a very high fixed cost to campaigns. Yeah. And so the origin is the quadrant of death, where even if you have low slope, it's not a success.
No, I agree. I mean, this curves, again, it turns out online advertising has some of the smallest fixed costs, right? I mean, you can think of a lot of other advertising that fixed costs. Imagine if you want to put an ad, on TV. I mean, you need a video production. I have an ad under my name that people can look up, what my email is and how to reach me. I mean, it took me 5 seconds to do. So that's not much of a fixed cost.
But
so just as an example,
where the campaign was judged on 10 to 20 to 50 sales, and in a campaign like this, the fixed cost would.
No, absolutely. I mean, but nothing fundamentally about what I'm saying changes if you just do a transitional shift of a curve, which is what you're talking about, right? Or up, basically, right? It changes the CPA.
Maybe you cannot aim for a campaign that has too few hits.
Right,
no
absolutely.
If the bid is low.
Right, absolutely. And what you're talking about is
AdFraud data.
Right. Well, I think what you're talking about is basically this curve shift translating up.
Yes.
Right? That's basically. But a lot of, at the end of the day, a lot of the concepts I'm talking about stay the same in effect. I think we're done with the slide. There are a lot of things that happen kind of in an undesirable way to an advertiser, and sometimes unanticipated. I mean, we talked about some of them. Competitive, they cause shifts in the wrong way. Competitive behavior. So, your competitor, a new competitor comes, leading to higher CPCs for you in terms of getting the same amount of traffic. That will cause a shift in the wrong way. Or people just increasing their bids because they say, this is really worthwhile for me. So all of these things cause shift in the curve in the wrong direction for you. Your competitor lowers their sale prices. We talked about this. Same thing will happen. You'll make less conversions for the amount that you pay. We make changes on that network side all the time. And some of them, may be quote-unquote unexpected to the advertiser. And so there are new traffic sources that are getting added and subtracted from our network all the time. MySpace suddenly comes online, your ad ends up showing there, it may not be good for you. You know, it may just not work. It may not be the right traffic for you, and you need to adjust very quickly. If you don't, you're gonna eventually be on a curve that's doing worse for you. Improvements that we do on user targeting, say, and other improvements we do to the auction. I mean, continuously we're trying to decide which ads to show, not only in terms of our revenue, but the top priority actually for us is users. Them being useful to users. At the end of the day, if they aren't useful to users, this whole ecosystem goes down to hell. And so there are cases that we find an advertiser just has very poor quality. You know, either they're saying something in the creative that says, you know, oh, I'm the best, greatest thing, and you go to their actual site, and it actually is not the case. Or, you know, it's just the overall quality of the ad campaign is not useful to the user, even though they may get clicks. And basically, we may just decide that we don't want to show that ad. Well, it's going to change curves on you when we do that. And last but not least is undetected click fraud. And it can really push this curve in the wrong way. And basically, you're going to spend the same amount of money, you're going to get less hits. Right? That should be very clear. And you need to adjust to that. Well, basically, if you think about undetected click fraud, if I shift this curve on you, if you were at a point where you're spending high, your spending needs to go lower. You need to adjust your CPCs and spend lower. But actually, the important thing here is that you will spend lower. You will spend less with Google. Not only will you lower your CPCs, but we'll make less money from you if click fraud happens. Go ahead.
This is assuming, of course, that advertisers are rational.
Yes, there are a lot of, this whole framework is assuming advertisers are rational. And you're absolutely right, advertisers behave in many irrational ways. There are advertisers that don't measure the ROI. My recommendation is...
One can argue with so many irrational advertisers, click fraud becomes a significant interest to Google because people don't know to reduce their spending under these.
Well, it turns out that in the most competitive areas in our business, which gets us the most amount of money, people are quite rational. You cannot get away spending lots of money on advertisement and lose money hand over fist without noticing it, even if you're irrational. So you're absolutely right. There are advertisers that don't measure ROI. That's my big worry, because actually, you know, they're the same advertisers that also are open to potential fear about click fraud, right? And they may just not measure and say, oh, you know, content ads, awful. I just will not even try to go near it, right? Because they have no way of measuring. And in many ways, like I said, what happens if somebody doesn't measure is their decisions are not based on data, it's based on fear. They're risk averse. And the volatility in ROI, any volatility in terms of the sales that they see, leads them to actually go lower than optimal. So in many cases, when somebody is worried about something, what you find them doing is not spending hand over fist. What you end up seeing them do is actually reduce their spending below their optimal point. And that's actually a big concern for us. So it turns out that even if they're irrational, the risk-averse behavior kicks in when they start seeing major erratic behavior in the system that they're seeing. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody needs to understand how much they're getting out of it, even if they're not doing it in the very kind of careful way that I'm suggesting, right? And they need to understand, in order to even stay in business, for that matter. But basically, there are a lot of reasons, again, our incentives aligning and wanting us to shift this curve another way. Again, if you remember, the point is that if we are this curve rather than this curve, people will spend more with us. And that's the optimal point in terms of spending. We do automated targeting, bid adjustments all the time, things like smart pricing that actually try to give you pricing that correlates to the quality of the click as best as we can. We try to give control to advertisers, and we continuously try to give them more control so that if they actually are capable of targeting and controlling the targeting, they can do that to optimize the ROI any which way they want. Click fraud is a major component, right, of this as well. One of many components, but a major component. Again, we do all of this stuff, and this is yet another way for us to make sure these curves are where they need to be, rather than shifting on us and people going to lower spending. And lots of free services from Google. Google Analytics that allows us to see what happens when somebody comes to your site and how to optimize it so they will sell more and to optimize your campaigns. Google Checkout, which basically allows you to have much simpler checkout when the user comes if they're part of Google Checkout. And in some cases, if somebody doesn't know your name, the fact that they're not sharing their credit card with you leads them to not worry about phishing of their credit card and various other things and actually making a sale. And so lots of things we do, free services, etc. Lots of areas we try to push this curve to the right-hand side. And click fraud detection is one of the important concepts there. So now if you go back to this advertiser, who wants to make a guess actually what was going on? It turns out one hint is that their clicks actually, I mean, I've rounded the numbers, but the clicks actually stayed the same. The amount of traffic they were getting stayed the same. And it actually, the other thing is that they said, I'm not even seasonal. They said, I mean, they were not in the business that they really expected major changes during Christmas. And this really confused them. I mean, you had this peaking during the December month of things really going haywire for them and things kind of returning back. And obviously they were convinced that somebody was click frauding them right in the center here, and things kind of stabilized. Any guesses in terms of what happened? Go ahead.
Other advertisers competing on the same keywords,
You're-
on the same business?
You're working at Google right now. It's not fair for you to say, but that's true. So it turns out I had lunch with him because basically in this forum, in the morning he said, Schumann was doing the forum early in the morning, and he did the poll. He said, how much click fraud do you think is happening? There were people saying 5%, 2%. He said 50%. I'm sure about it. 50%. As far as I know, 50% of the clicks you're sending my way are just worthless. Well, I had lunch with him, and we looked over his data and started talking to him and tried to understand actually what happened. And so I looked at this, and it was very suspicious. The amount of traffic he was getting was about constant. His cost was going up. So the first thing that came to my mind is his CPC obviously went up, $2, from $1 to $2. So I said, did you notice other advertisers entering the system? He said, there was one other guy who came in and basically started putting ads. And I said, well, one thing you can notice is your CPC went up because of that. Then, things go even more haywire. And I asked him, are you in a business where basically, what you sell is replaceable by another person? He said, we have stuff that nobody else sells, but the majority of our revenue actually comes from stuff that, anybody else could sell. So I said, did you notice by chance that advertiser that came in was also undercutting your prices? He said, yeah. In fact, in mid-January, he reacted to it. I mean, the advertiser was and in mid-January, he actually reacted to it, and it was all fine. What's interesting is in this discussion, he had reacted in all these cases. Like basically, they noticed, they reacted, they reduced their sales price. At this point, everything was fine. And as far as he was concerned, this was not the driver of his ROI. As far as he was concerned, it was click fraud that was the driver of his ROI. And really, one of the issues to be careful is click fraud is one aspect that changes ROI. If you make it a scapegoat as an advertiser, in terms of just anything that happens to your ROI, you say it's due to click fraud, one of the things that happens is you misidentify the root causes. And in fact, had we not had this discussion, it's perfectly possible that next another competitor would have come, and his reaction again would be delayed because basically the advertiser didn't realize that what he needed to do is react much more quickly here and reduce his sale prices. And he would have had more sales during the period that he missed. All right, we have a few minutes left. So I want to give you another view. I mean, this framework hopefully helped you understand kind of our incentives being aligned with advertiser and us really kind of having strong economic incentive for increasing the spending on us, like giving it better curves and click fraud detection and not allowing click fraud to happen to do that for us. But there's another way to also look at this problem. And the way to think about it is, what about all those poor converting publishers, say, in content ads and other places? And it could be due to fraud. It could be due to the fact that just traffic that they get is low quality. It's not fraud. It's just that somebody's sitting in Turkey and you're advertising there, and the chances that they're going to buy from you are low. So if you think about a simple flow, advertisers spend $100, say they have 100 clicks at a $1 CPC, and imagine that everybody's good, has the same kind of uniform curve, so that you don't have to worry about which curve is better than which other curve is ROI, and they make $100. They're all good publishers. They're about the same in terms of the quality of traffic that they give you. Obviously, what happens with Google is a little bit more complex than that, right? If you think about those publishers and separate Google from them, Google is a huge publisher itself, right? Basically, our search is a major source of our traffic and our revenue. And so think of, just for the purpose of this example, that out of those 100 clicks and $100 that you spend, half of those clicks come to Google at the $1 CPC, and half of them go to the other publishers that, again, have similar quality. Now, because we are running that network, we take a cut of that, right? There's a revenue share that comes to us. So just 60 clicks at the dollar would have given $50, but we take, say, for assumption of this example, say we take 25% cut of what from what the other publishers are generating. So we get another $12.50, and the publishers end up with $37.50. So the total ends up being $100 that advertisers spend. Everything's fine. Google made $62, and the other publishers make $37. Now imagine that we let the bad publisher enter the ecosystem. And the bad publisher could be also doing click fraud, or it could just be low quality, like I mentioned, for any reason. And for the sake of this example, just assume that they make no extra sales for the clicks that they generate for the advertiser. Now the advertiser was paying $1 CPC. Just assume that they had unlimited budget. So just for the sake of this argument, assume that the 50 clicks that were going to the good publisher stayed, the 50 clicks that were going to Google stayed, and 100 extra clicks. This guy says fraudulent clicking on the ads and get 100 clicks. Now the advertisers, if they don't react, they're going to be in bad shape. This curve shifted on them. Their CPC is $1, now they're getting 200 clicks, they're spending $200, and they're making the same amount of sales that they used to with $100. So the rational thing for them to do is shift down in terms of the new curve, which is really bad for them. And so they make less sales, potentially, but basically they want to go to a CPC that's half of what it used to be. So they will go to a CPC of 50 cents. The important thing, if you see what happens in the dynamics of this, is that that's really bad for Google. Because now every click that Google gives them, even though it's very qualified, only gets 50 cents. Every click that a good publisher gives them, even though it was qualified, gets 50 cents. And all the value of the system gets diverted to the bad publishers. A lot of the value gets diverted to the bad publishers. And so if you add up all the numbers, you will end up seeing that the good publishers make less, Google makes less, and all we're doing is fattening the pockets of the bad publisher. And this is not math magic here. Basically, you can try any numbers that you want, and you'll see the same behavior. The basic concept here is the following. The advertiser is setting an average bid across the whole network. Right? They see how the whole network works, they give an average bid. Well, if the network is non-uniform in terms of the quality it delivers, guess what? The people who are giving you the better quality lose, and the people who are giving the worst quality win. And basically, profit sharing, even though we have revenue share, does not help us in this enough to offset the problem that arises. And actually, one point I want to make is that this is the best case for Google and good publishers in this dire situation. Can anybody point out why that's the case, actually?
CPC probably would go down. The cost would go down.
The spend on Google, well, the reason is we assume they cut their CPC in half, and we assume that they still get 50 clicks on Google. Well, guess what? This was the curve on Google. Basically, the fact that they spend less, they reduce their CPC should put them at lower traffic because of the competition. So actually, this is the best case. What's going to happen is they go 50 cents, is that they're not going to get 50 clicks from a good publisher. They're not going to get 50 clicks from Google, which means that Google and the good publishers even make less, and more of the money gets diverted, and the advertisers are even more in worse shape. So actually, hopefully, people, like this framework makes you understand why this is terrible for us, terrible for the ecosystem. It's a very simple concept. It's really simple economic concept. And if you try to think about this, the impact of the poor performing traffic sources, again, think of them as being non-uniform. It decreases the Google profits, it drives good publishers out of the network, because basically we're not giving the value that they deserve. Effectively, when they do this, dollars are going to move away. We're making less profit, we're having less good publishers, and this thing takes a very downward turn. It has positive feedback. We're lining up, fattening the pockets of the people who are not providing value. And the options for Google are really, there's one option, we can adjust the CPCs and spend such that we drive more towards the part of the traffic that's good and less towards the part of traffic that's bad. If it's click fraud, driving less to them means just paying them nothing, not charging them for the clicks that come from it. And the other option, which is also we do, and we're going to do more of it, is to give more control to the advertiser to do the same, to drive more traffic towards, again, think of curves that are, three curves that have different behavior. You want to have more of your CPCs, higher CPCs, and more spending on the curves that are better for you. And one of the important things about giving control to advertisers is also important to give them the data, such that when they make decisions, it's actually based on actual behavior as opposed to gut feels. And basically, if you think about this, when you do this, you will increase the CPC on the good sources. You will decrease the CPC on the bad sources to the extreme of, like I said, in click fraud, where the CPC becomes zero. Effectively, you're not going to pay for the click. And you get a much more uniform cost per acquisition across the whole network. And that's much better for the ecosystem.
How do you know what's good and bad?
for an advertiser, it's very clear. It's the CPA curves that I showed you. I mean, CPA
From the
curves
sources.
from the sources. How does Google know?
Yeah.
Google gets conversions from a whole bunch of our advertisers, so we can actually look at the health of our network.
And you map that to the source where that came from.
Absolutely, right. We know exactly how much we're paying to a publisher. We know exactly, how what their behavior is when, in terms of what they're getting for advertisers. We know the value they provide, and so does the advertiser. The summary of the economics. Advertisers in Google have lots of incentives to higher sales for advertisers when the ROI curves go better, and along with higher spend on Google. Non-uniform ROI performance across the network really does bad things to our ecosystem. It really reduces our profits. It really pushes good publishers out of our network. Really bad thing for us. Undetected click fraud is one of many things that negatively impacts ROI. It's an important one, and we really, have, like I said, we've lots of incentives if we're trying to push our ROI curve the right way to do a good job on this. And so that's the key point. Lots of incentives beyond just maintaining advertiser trust. That's what's really important to understand.
So you're talking about dynamically adjusting the CPC based on whether somebody's a good guy or a bad guy. So doesn't that subvert the auction process?
No, it really doesn't, right? Basically, think of it again as having three different curves. And in some cases, the advertiser has a very hard time actually deciding. Say you're going on content, right? We do smart pricing on content. We've done it for years. And what it does is actually decide how much to charge you. The auction actually happens, right? The auction happens, says, you should be charged 50 cents because of the competition, okay? So nothing has happened yet. Now, what we do with smart pricing is we take that 50 cents and we say, in this context, for you, that's not going to get you as much as it should. So we're going to charge you 25 cents rather than 50 cents, right? That's basically what we do. And the reason we do that is that if you think about it, content, for example, has just hundreds and thousands of sites, right, where you're actually showing. Sometimes we show very little on the site. So if you try to measure it yourself, it's extremely difficult. And in fact, controlling the CPC per content site that shows your ad is extremely difficult for a given advertiser. But we can do it because we have all the aggregate data and we can see what their performance is and we can kind of adjust things appropriately. So again, it's in our incentive to push your ROI curve better. And because in some cases it's very hard for a given advertiser to control that, we need to step in and make sure that their advertiser actually gets value. And so the auction actually in terms of competition works exactly the same way. If you were competing with another person, all the CPCs go initially without being adjusted. But once the competition decides who's going to show up and who's not with a given rank, that's when we apply our adjustments. Go ahead.
Are advertisers incentive to truthfully report their ROI information?
In terms of conversions? Not necessarily in our system. So basically, in fact, that's one of the important issues about normalizing conversion data. And one of the things that when you try to analyze conversion data is extremely tricky. In fact, some advertisers just use conversion as a way of getting sites instance. And basically, they may put a conversion on their front page. And so, it's just really how many visitors they have. So really, it's a normalization of conversions is a whole science on itself, and we've been at it for a long time. So to understand how do we actually normalize conversions such as they're meaningful in terms of what you're doing with them.
So if Andrew and I are both doing that, we're at a content site, will we both get the same smart pricing discount if we was it dependent on the actual
right now, in the context that you show up, it's less dependent on the advertiser. But continuously we're working on actually making it more and more dependent on the advertiser. So there's no sort of context that you show up and lots of them. And right now when the auction happens, we kind of, for a given context, we kind of make it overall guess basically what the value is to all of the advertisers and just appropriately for any advertiser. But there is work being done to actually make that much more selective per advertiser. Because as you can imagine, one site may work much better than another. One of the problems that you get into is that if you think about a smaller site, in some cases there's just not enough data for you to pick specifically for a given advertiser. I mean, one advertiser got 10 clicks, and another advertiser got 20 clicks, maybe even no conversions have happened. Right? So it's much more difficult. Noise is a huge issue. So like I said, this stuff is all a whole science to itself in terms of how you deal with all this.
But it seems like there's just a gap for the auction. We're going to give Andrew a 90% discount, we give a 1% discount. If our bids are like really close, we could make the show because of the impression is not the value of Andrew. But he may outbid by
Okay, right now it doesn't affect the outcome of the auction, as I mentioned. It's for a given context, a given auction happens, we decide the same discount, say, on various people. If you go to select a discount, you're absolutely right. It can affect the context of the auction. But basically, we would only do that because basically we feel that advertisers don't have control at that fine level in order to decide for themselves. So if you did have the control and you did have the capability of at that fine granularity to control what's going on, you would probably pick what would be. Right? Because basically that's the point. And in those cases, we would only be doing those. Right now, smart pricing works for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you share conversions with us or not. If it turns to a point where we actually try to do things selectively for you, it will be that you understand that your conversions are going to be used for that, and that you're making conversions much more meaningful. Right, so basically, that's the point. Okay, I think I'm out of time, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. One thing, maybe I'll just take a couple minutes, just like I said, give a very quick preview of the rest of the talk. The slides are going to be all there, such that you guys can follow. I'm not going to cover this in any detail. We basically do a wider net in terms of throwing things out in order to make sure that we catch as much of the click fraud as possible, than to leave as little undetected click fraud. And the false positives in this business are not much of an issue because we let the click go to the advertiser, even though we don't charge for it. And so a bunch of those clicks actually do convert. But it's fine because basically it's much more to our interest to push your curve to a better ROI. And the false positives, basically, if we really throw a click that wasn't supposed to be thrown out, hopefully you'll adjust your CPC and increase your spend with us to adjust for it. We throw out less than 10% proactively of our revenue and our clicks, essentially. And the other part, reactive, is less than 0.02%. That's the way our operations work. Basically, advertisers complain. Some number of advertisers complain. We look at their complaint and we say, oh, it wasn't an issue, or yes, it was an issue, but we threw it all out. And there are very few cases where we actually see that, we missed the point. We missed click fraud. It's very useful for us because we use that to improve the rest of the system for all advertisers, shifting everybody's curves that are getting affected. And in those cases, basically, the amount that we credit reactively because advertisers request us is that amount. 0.02%. That's not a claim that that's the total amount of click fraud that we don't catch. It's really a number from our operations. And people have, if you've looked at the press, people seem to just not understand it and say, well, that number is impossible. But if this is coming directly from our operations, what is it not impossible? I'm telling you, that's what we do with respect to credits we give to advertisers. Metrics are very important. Try to go ahead, please.
The reason you get the impossible answer is because there is a complete disconnect between the statistics that some advertisers can collect on their own and what you seem to collect. And so that goes back to one of the objectives, which hopefully will improve in the future, of sharing data on what it is that you are doing with the advertisers.
Absolutely, and we do.
The advertiser had a better idea of how you came to this conclusion.
Right. And we actually do share. We are probably most transparent in terms of the data we currently share with advertisers. But that's actually a very good point. A lot of issues, and that's the point about the metrics. And there's a whole section of metrics in this talk, and issues with metrics and the quality of data and various other things. It's very important. But one of the important things about metrics is determining, what the purpose of the metric is. Is it try to determine click fraud trends, or is it try to determine the impact on advertisers? One of them is how much click fraud is happening. The other is how much of it is remaining undetected. Lots of areas for academic research in this area. There are lots of sources of various metrics, including advertisers that do their analysis. Lots of limitations to what's going on. And there's, slide after slide, there's a section that talks about all those limitations of why what's happening is actually to be erroneous or give you the wrong conclusions. One of the simple ones is plain counting issue. We wrote a paper, over a year ago about fictitious clicks. That's, basically people visiting sending requests to an advertiser based on page reloads, and that being counted as clicks incorrectly. Google is the only ad network right now that gives you a mechanism to correct the analysis for this purpose. And that also, the corollary of that is that any analysis people do on advertiser logs that is from other networks right now has this issue, and you'll get that error. So when somebody gives you a number that they say includes Google, Yahoo, and everybody else, you have to be really suspicious about what's underlying that number, because they're not solving this issue. They cannot, basically, without extra help from the ad networks that Google provides. What we recommend for advertisers: measure your ROI. undetected click fraud cannot hide. It will lower your ROI. And the other thing is we do provide advertisers exactly how many clicks to throw out at a very fine granularity on their campaign on a daily basis. Every campaign that they have, they can check that, oh, I got charged for this many clicks, I didn't get charged for this many clicks. And compare it to your own estimates if you think what you think should have happened. And basically there's a section on counting clicks, which is actually, again, very important for correct analysis. The goals of that is to understand the underlying differences of advertiser data and user data. As most people understand, what happens on a click is the user sends the click request to Google, Google sends a redirect response back, that goes to the advertiser. So you have Google's information, data, advertisers' information and data, and you need to reconcile them. The accurate reconciliation really requires help from the ad networks, as you mentioned. And we really want to be in a situation where people can verify the claim that Google makes. If we say 100 clicks happen, we want the advertisers to be able to verify that. They don't have to trust us that 100 clicks happen. And also in order for them to do correct analysis. Very quickly, reasons these things can be off is basically 3 main reasons why the numbers can be off. These page reloads that I mentioned, which have nothing to do with Google, they're only between the user's browser and the advertiser that end up getting counted as clicks, inflating the number that the advertiser may count on their site and actually thinking that they're bad because it looks like somebody came to your site like 6 times and you paid for them, while it was really just because they were hitting the back button, going deeper in your site and they're actually a good customer. Redirects not being followed. Redirects can drop in the net. The user's computer mess up. Your site may be down. I mean, people may click and, we send you the user's computer towards your way and your site may be down. Lots of reasons why redirects don't follow through. That makes your numbers lower than us. And finally, this is not very common, but somebody spoofing, basically directly coming to you and making it look like a Google click when it has nothing to do with us. We saw it, we never charged you for it, it just came directly into your weblog, looks like one. And I promise this is the last slide, I know I've gone way overboard, but it's actually an important slide for people in research to understand what it takes to do careful reconciliation between ad network data and the advertiser's data. And one of the things we provide, which is called auto tagging, and it gives you what's called a GCL ID. It's a click ID. It's a unique ID per click. And what it allows you to do is to get rid of the impact of those page reloads on your site. Today, if you have a campaign with Google, we tell you, we charge you for 3 clicks, we charge you $3, we threw out 2 of the clicks. So you can deduce from that there are a total of 5 clicks that happened, charge you for 3 of them. You look at your log, you see these events happening from Google. They'll have GCL IDs on them. If you just counted that without cleaning, you would count 7. But actually it turns out that you have to get rid of the non-unique GCL IDs, which is exactly what auto tagging does. Again, Google's the only company that actually allows you to do this right now in order for your analysis to be correct. So you'll count 4 clicks. Okay, so you count 4 clicks, Google says 5 clicks. The discrepancy is measurable. You say, okay, 1 click is off. And guess what? That click, typically the reason it's off is because of redirects not making it to your site. So completely measurable in terms of what's going on. You don't have to trust Google that, and if you have to trust, even if there's discrepancy exists, you can measure the discrepancy. Go ahead.
Will Google also give me the GCL IDs from their view of what we're charged for and what we're valid?
No. I will tell you what we will hopefully give you potentially in the future, but not that, because that basically leads to a point. I mean, if we do that, how many people guess that the feedback is too great to fraudsters? That's really the point on our side. If we go to that fine granularity of telling you this click was charged for, this click wasn't, reverse engineering our system just becomes that much easier on somebody who wants to defeat the system. And one of the whole points about fighting click fraud is prevention. One of the ways you prevent is to reduce the feedback to fraudsters. And that's an important issue. But go ahead.
So the purpose of this workshop is to encourage researchers to look into this area. Click fraud and ad fraud is one of the few areas in computer security where security by obscurity is sort of an accepted view of something that's good. How do you expect us to be able to do research, to do good productive research when we have no idea what you're doing to detect the fraud and to catch the fraud?
I think that's a good topic for discussion, right, in the discussion section. And I mean it honestly, because I don't think I can answer you in like 2 seconds. And there are a lot of issues in terms of data you have even available. It doesn't matter what I tell you in terms of how we do things. The data we have is very different than the data that an advertiser has. If I cannot provide my data to you because of privacy reasons, which is a very important issue, then it doesn't matter what I do with my data. Because what you can do with the advertiser data, the information that you have is fundamentally different, completely different. And so it doesn't matter if I tell you I do X on my data, you cannot replicate it on your data. So that's a huge, huge issue, actually. And we can talk about it. I think it's an important issue to talk about in the discussion section. This is ending right away.
I point out that it's not just a problem for the academics, it's also a problem for the advertisers.
Absolutely. It's a problem for advertisers, it's a problem for third parties that try to estimate this. It's a fundamental problem. And it's a problem that unfortunately is very hard to deal with because say there are all these third parties that want to help advertisers decide what's happening. What would happen if Google shares all our data, including what an IP did and what queries they did? You can imagine the privacy nightmare.
The thing is that currently the boundary seems to be shifted too far on the secret method side.
It's not so.
Too much verification.
Right, but the secret method. I mean, I think we should leave this.
Okay, this is actually a very good topic for discussion at the end of the day.
I really honestly believe in this. And one of the things that's tough in the system, and we're perfecting this at this point, is that in some cases it's hard. If an old click comes to you again, say it was from last week. Knowing that it's unique is possible, but it takes more effort, right? You have to have a window of keeping track of these GCL IDs and knowing.
Actually, I'm curious, is there any crypto used in these GCL IDs?
There is no crypto, and I'll get to, basically, I'll get to how we
spoofing should not, that's easy to do.
Yes, and I'll tell you exactly how we will avoid that. So the old GCL ID is something that you can actually deal with, but basically it's tough because you have to keep track of a very long window of have I seen this ID before and get rid of it if it's not unique. And spoofing is actually a problem that's harder, right? Because, click comes, even though it looks unique to you in any window that you pick, the question is did it come from Google? And it will mess up your accounting. And basically what we are in the process of doing in a selective way, and we're going to hopefully roll it out in a major way for more people, is basically giving you a list of GCL IDs that we saw on our site that we're going to charge you for. And then it becomes very easy. You can compare the two sites very easily. You'll see as GCL ID didn't happen on Google's side, therefore you can just get rid of it in a certain time frame. And so spoofing and old clicks go away. Furthermore, you can actually identify clicks that there's a discrepancy. If it's one click discrepancy, you end up saying, oh, I saw all these GCL IDs on my site, I didn't see GCL ID 5. So that's the one that didn't make it. So basically, this allows you full accountability, full verification of what's going on, which is very important. At this point, takeaways.
Maybe we can come back to this actually at the end of the day.
Sure, absolutely.
This is actually, I think a lot of these slides actually will probably be useful when we come back to this.
Absolutely, and this is a very important issue. One of our hopes is that everybody in the industry, in the ad networks, decides to share this information with advertisers, because I think it will lead to much cleaner analysis from an advertiser point of view of what's going on.
How do you see that click ID stream being used as the Oracle?
As the Oracle?
As Oracle.
What do you mean?
Reverse engineer.
Oh, if you share this, we're not telling you which one we threw out, which one we didn't. Yeah. We're just telling you, the ones we saw. It's all of them. It's 5. It's not 3. Right? And in fact, if you give you the dollar amounts, if you do your analysis, now you can actually do analysis on cost. Right? You can say, oh, this one I think was bad, therefore out of the X number of dollars that I spent, $1 was bad, as opposed to just counting clicks.
But doesn't the cost show which ones were rejected?
If you look at a very fine grain, at the end of the day, we have to give some feedback, right? We can't get away with giving absolutely no feedback. But
I want that information.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So, but we're not telling you which one we threw out. There are corner cases where you can figure that out.
Kourosh, it seems like if I can control all the traffic to a site, then I could know, of course, and it's all invalid traffic, then I could also determine the number that goes through.
Oh, absolutely. That's why we didn't worry about telling you how many we threw out. Because if you send us 100 clicks as an advertiser, we're just trying to figure out what our system is doing, and we only charge you 50, 50 didn't get charged. So in fact, we had no worry in terms of feedback to bad people when we decided to add the number of invalid clicks in the reports. Because the bad person knows, like you mentioned. It's a good person that this number is useful for and harder for them to determine. They could know as well if they analyze their logs and everything, but it's much more useful to just tell them what we're doing. Right, so actually, the feedback on invalid clicks is nothing for the fraudster. You got it. It's really for the good people.
Yes.
Right. I'm done, basically. Sorry, I went longer.
Actually, I think we're going to make you give the rest of the talk in the afternoon.
Well, whatever people want. But
this is actually really interesting.
Basically, the key takeaways are lots of economic incentive for us. We fraud hundreds of millions of dollars proactively to protect people. We don't do it just out of the goodness of our heart. It's our business. The current evaluation metrics have lots of limitations, lots of information in the talk in that. And like I said, Google is the only company right now that's unique in terms of allowing people to do this reconciliation and verification of what Google claims, and which we really hope that other ad networks follow. And lots of information, lots of other resources. There is an AdFraud resource center. This talk will be on there. We'll add the talk to the whole workshop program as well. I apologize for going overboard. I hope it's been useful, and thank you for your time.